Hi, my name is Bert Stephanie. I'm a portrait and fine art photographer from Belgium. And in this video, we are going to take a look at this one-of-a-kind lens. Now this is the TTartisan 75mm f1.5 Swirly Bokeh lens. And it makes me think a little bit about when I was a teenager. There was this girl, she was wild, she was crazy, she was stunning, but you knew she was trouble. You knew she wasn't girlfriend material, but still she had that fatal attraction. Pergear, one of the biggest suppliers of third-party lenses, sent me this lens and I get to keep it, but my opinions are my own and Pergear nor TTartisan had any say in the making of this video. Now we can't talk about this lens without a little history lessons, because this is basically a copy of a legendary Carl Zeiss lens that was introduced just before World War II. The Jena Biotar 75mm f1.5. For decades, this lens was one of the best optical designed lenses around, but if you look at it from today's perspective, it doesn't look so technically sound anymore. Still, a Biotar in decent state will set you back around $2,000 or euros on the used market. Now that's a lot of money for a really old lens, which may show mechanical defects, fungus, all kinds of different things that can go wrong with such an old piece of glass. But TTartisan now makes this copy of that legendary lens and you can have it for less than 300 euros. That's actually less than what the Biotar costed when it came out over 80 years ago. When I get a new piece of equipment, I usually just test it out around the house, shooting everything and anything. And usually I get a hang of it pretty easily, but with this lens things were a bit different. Some pictures were technically surprisingly good, but no sign of that legendary character of the lens. Other pictures were downright horrible, and then every now and then I got a picture that showed me why people are so lyrical about this lens. So after playing with the lens around the house, I did a quick impromptu photo shoot with a friend of mine. This is supposed to be a weird lens, so I added some weird light. There's no real good natural reason to add a little off-camera flash with a red gel to light the subject, but I just wanted to do it to see what I got out of it. We then moved on to some cleaner black and white portraits. And the subject mentioned that it looked a bit like the U2 album, The Joshua Tree, shot by Anton Corbijn, one of my heroes, so I'll be happy to take the compliment. This lens only comes in M42 screw mount, so which means that it will actually screw on your camera. And there's a good reason why screw mounts pretty much are gone and we changed into bayonet mounts, because even when you're focusing you can actually unscrew the lens and it also doesn't always line up perfectly straight to the camera, so you can have your focus scale on the side or even on the bottom or slightly skewed, which is probably even worse. Luckily TTartisan has a pretty good solution for it, so they have these 3 little screws around the lens that you can loosen so you can align the lens. Some adapters actually have the same kind of feature, which is very handy if you're using screw mount lenses. Now, it is important to say that the screwdriver is not included in the package, and it is a Torx T5, which not everyone has lying around at home. The upside of screw mount is that you can get a cheap adapter to put this lens on pretty much any camera system. I wanted to test it on full frame because that's what it's meant for. I also wanted to try it on a Fujifilm APS-C sensor, and because it has a pretty big image circle, you can even use it on medium format GFX cameras. I did a little test shoot because I wanted to compare and get a feel of how the lens would perform on these different sensor sizes. And I started with making pretty much the same picture with the 3 different cameras. It became pretty clear that this lens is sharper in the center than on the sides of the lens, which is the case with pretty much any lens, but with the TTartisan 75 it's pretty extreme. For starters, the center of the lens is actually a bit smaller, and once that sharpness falls off, it falls off really fast. And it's not just the sharpness that falls away on the edges. The lens goes pretty crazy and gives you that very characteristic swirly bokeh. Usually when you put a full frame lens on an APS-C sensor, you don't really notice much of the imperfections of the edges of the lens, simply because you're just using the middle of the lens. But with this lens you still get a lot of crazy things happening around the edges, and that's simply because that sweet spot center is actually pretty small. With a full frame camera you get the full craziness, and if you want to dial it up to 11, then the medium format sensor is your friend. I hate to admit it, but I don't feel like I've mastered this lens yet. It catches me off guard from time to time, but here are some of the things that I've already learned. If you want your subject sharp and in focus, you better put it in the middle of the frame. And I mean the middle of the frame. Probably like the 50–60% of the frame middle that is sharp, otherwise it goes unsharp really fast. And the bigger the sensor, the smaller that sweet spot will be. Now about that swirly bokeh that this lens is so famous for. It isn't a given, it doesn't always occur. You're really going to need something busy and chaotic in the background, like branches or foliage. Another thing that might work is spots of light. That works really well too. And then you have to get your distances right. It really depends on the distance between yourself, your subject and the background. So you got to get that right, and it's worth experimenting a bit to get that swirly bokeh effect. But even without swirly bokeh, this lens packs a lot of character and it flares very easily but nicely. In a control environment and when stopped down, you can even get some really sharp, clean images out of this lens, but you'll have to work for it. Because as soon as this lens sees a little opportunity, it will go wild on you. The TTartisan 75mm f1.5 Swirly Bokeh is a relatively compact lens, but it is a chunky and heavy piece of glass and metal. The focus ring is really smooth and nice, with a big focus throw, which isn't so good for speed, but it is good for accuracy, which you are going to need for this lens. The aperture ring is also pretty smooth and has a nice amount of resistance, so you don't actually change your aperture when you don't want to. This feels like a really well-built lens, much better actually than its price tag would suggest. Do not get this lens if you're into sharp, crisp, clean photography. But if you're looking for some legendary, crazy, unpredictable character, you might consider adding this lens to your bag. I love what this lens does to the image. However, such a strong character should be used moderately in my opinion, and I wouldn't recommend it as your one go-to lens for anything. It's the kind of lens that I would take out of my camera bag to switch things up and have a little fun. It's the kind of lens that puts a smile on my face, and that's a big deal. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I feel like I've done way too many reviews in the past year or so. So if you have any ideas of topics, subjects that I can tackle in the next one, put them in the comments below. And while you're at it, you might as well subscribe and like this video, if you like it, of course. See you in the next one.